Hi beautiful, welcome to my channel. In today's video we are going to be doing the eyeshadow palette tag part 2. I was super excited to go through my collection to answer all of these prompts. If you're excited for the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to my channel, please don't leave without subscribing. Now with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Eyeshadow palette content is by far my favorite type of content to film, to consume, to think about. I absolutely love anything to do with eyeshadows. I have a very large eyeshadow palette collection, and I was thrilled when I saw that Samantha Marsh and Ali Glines once again collaborated on a palette tag. I definitely was one of those creators that last year when they first released their palette tag immediately wanted to film my video, and once again of course I want to participate. If you guys don't follow Samantha Marsh and Ali Glines yet, I will of course leave their videos linked down below in the description box of mine. They are two of my favorite YouTubers. I've been subscribed to both of them for years and years now, and I highly recommend both of their channels. And I will also leave a link down below to all of the palettes I'm mentioning in today's video, and my first eyeshadow palette tag video will be linked as well. Okay, so the first prompt is all-time favorite palette, and when I tell you this was the hardest one to answer and the one that I left for last because I just couldn't make up my mind. For a while I even considered naming just top palette brands or just a few different favorite palettes of mine, because this is just not a fair question. I can't pick between my children, you know, but I came to my senses and I'm going to talk about a palette that I truly consider to be above all others. And it might surprise you a little bit, maybe not, but of course I'll explain why. And that is the Natasha Denona Gold eyeshadow palette. This palette right here is absolute perfection. When I first thought of picking only one palette to answer this question, the first palettes that came to mind were my Pat McGrath eyeshadow palettes. And if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know that I have a Pat McGrath palette obsession. You will see some Pat McGrath palettes mentioned in this video, but I concluded that my all-time favorite palette is this one right here. Unfortunately, this palette is discontinued at the moment. If I find it anywhere on the internet, I will link it down below for you. And the reason this is my favorite is because this palette has very similar glittery, glimmery, shimmery shades to my favorite glittery, shimmery shades from Pat McGrath, but it also has the most buttery, blendable, pigmented matte shades ever. Out of all of the palettes in my collection, I like the matte formula from Natasha Denona the best, and this palette has some absolutely beautiful neutral and warm toned matte shades. Besides that, I like that it's not an all neutral palette. It has like a couple of pops of color that I can have fun with, and it has these glimmery shimmer shades right here that are very comparable to those that I can find in Pat McGrath palettes, but combined with this matte formula right here that I absolutely love. So it's a combination of having an amazing color story with colors that I find very wearable. I can use this palette for every day if I just stick to like the mattes and the non-glittery shimmers, or I can go all out and create a beautiful nighttime look with it. I can make it neutral, or I can make it a little bit colorful with the teal shades. So for all of those reasons, I concluded that this right here has to be my all-time favorite palette. I'm sure this is going to change in the future at some point, but for right now I am sticking to that answer. Next we have new favorite palette, and I went with the Rose Quartz palette from Huda Beauty. This palette I also believe to be an extremely versatile palette. It has beautiful neutral to cool tone matte shades, and it's got the most incredible pops of color. I'm feeling a pattern here. I feel like I really like palettes that I can use for really nice everyday natural looks, but a palette with which I can also transform those looks into fun nighttime looks. And I'm all about a really nice blendable pigmented matte and a very attention grabbing type of a shimmer shade. And well, this palette right here has them both. Here's the 5 looks, 1 palette video that I created with this one, and I absolutely love the color story of this one as well. I love the purples. I love that she put neutral tones, cool tones, and also warm tones in this one. These two up here are warm toned shades, so you have a lot of variety, a lot of versatility within this Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. It launched only 2.5 months ago or so, in the month of November, and I have been in love with it ever since it arrived to my collection. In fact, it quickly took the place of one of my all-time favorite Huda Beauty palettes. So next, let's talk about a palette that I keep just for the memories. And by the way, I am leaving you all of the prompts down in the description box of the video in case you want to make a video of your own or leave me your answers down in the comments. I would absolutely love to read them. So a palette that I keep for the memories is definitely this one right here. This is my original Urban Decay Naked palette. This kind of like changed the game for me. First of all, when this palette came out, I could not afford it, and I was able to get it because a friend of mine gave me a gift card to Sephora for Christmas. I had never tried this quality of eyeshadow ever before, and my mind was totally blown. I practice my eyeshadow looks with this one all the time, but I would really try to like not use it a lot because I wanted it to like last me a long time. And like 8 years later, here we are. So I use it very sparingly, but every chance I could, if that makes sense, until I eventually, the year after, got the Naked 3 palette, and that was my second, I guess, high-end palette purchase. Anyways, it changed the game for me because I realized that I could do eyeshadow looks like the ones that I used to see people do on YouTube, if that makes sense. Like, I was kind of capable of creating the same types of looks, and so I feel like it gave me some makeup confidence in that sense, and it motivated me to buy more palettes and play with makeup more. And eventually I was so obsessed with makeup that I wanted to leave my office job to like go work at Sephora because I wanted to learn more about the industry. Anyways, as you can see, lots and lots of memories attached to this one. It is a super old palette that, by the way, it could still perform really good if I tried to use it, even though it's old and expired now. But I honestly don't see myself ever getting rid of this Urban Decay palette because of the memories, you know? A palette that is underrated, and I feel like I went through so many different palettes when I tried to answer this question. This was another question that for me was very difficult because every time that I could think of a palette that I thought was really good and underrated, I was like, it's not underrated, relax, that palette is actually pretty popular. So then I realized that I believe this one right here is actually an underrated palette, even though it is from one of the top rated brands, which is Natasha Denona. I feel like within the Natasha Denona collections and mentions and like palettes, this one is pretty underrated. I personally don't ever see anyone talking about it, and I am obsessed with this one. This is the mini star palette from Natasha Denona. I just really love the color story. I love the performance, and I love how a 5-pan eyeshadow palette can be as versatile as this one is. It has a beautiful taupey matte shade that you can use as a transition shade. It has this really beautiful intense matte brown right here to deepen everything up, and then it has these 3 very different looking shimmers that you can apply along with those mattes on the eyelid area to create really different looks. You can also combine the shimmers. I just feel like I could do a 5 looks 1 palette video with a 5 pan palette, and every look would come out visibly different. So I just think it's such a versatile palette. You can use it for daytime, you can use it for nighttime if you use this shimmer shade right here. I believe that this one is underrated, only $25, and I could not possibly recommend this little palette enough. So that is my answer for that. A palette that is not a fave, but I can't get rid of. And this is the one question that I needed to cheat on, and I have two palettes instead of one for very similar reasons, and those are these right here. This one is the Natasha Denona Love Palette, which this is what it looks like here. I like this palette, but it's not my favorite. I feel like I don't really reach for these specific types of color too much. I was very excited for this purple shade, and it doesn't really perform the best. And just overall, it's just like, it's not a palette that overly excites me, especially for it being a Natasha Denona palette. And then my Mothership number 4 palette right here. I believe that these shades individually are absolutely beautiful, but I had a really difficult time combining these shades, not stepping outside of this palette to create looks. I did a 5 looks 1 palette with this one, in which I exclusively used these shades to create the looks, and I had a really difficult time. I find that because every single one of these shades has the exact same formula, it's hard to get a difference in dimension with this palette when it comes to eye looks. If you get or have this palette just to like dip into specific colors combining with other palettes, then it's a beautiful palette, but like on its own, it's just not a palette that I ever reach for. And the reason that these palettes are not my favorite, but I also can't get rid of them, is because of the artists that made this palette. Both Natasha Denona and Pat McGrath are two of my favorite brands to review here on my channel. Every time they launch a new palette, I buy it, I review it, I try it, I give you looks with it. And so I feel like I need these palettes at the very least for reference, in case I ever need to compare a new eyeshadow palette to shades in these, in case another palette ever comes out that is similar to these, and also selfishly because they kind of complete my collection of palettes on both brands. So for all of those reasons, even though these right here are not necessarily my favorite, I can't part with them. The next question is my Fave collab palette, and I feel like throughout the years this has definitely changed, but the one that at this current moment is my favorite collaboration palette has to be the one I'm wearing, by the way. I love this look. I love this palette. The Red Dragon palette from Odin's Eye Cosmetics in collaboration with Judy. I just find this palette to be so special. First of all, Odin's Eye has stepped their eyeshadow game by like 1000%, and they still make really affordable eyeshadow palettes, and I believe that these formulas could very easily compete with Charlotte Tilbury, Pat McGrath, Natasha Denona. Like, I know that those are big words, but I promise you that this formula is just that good. I mean, you're looking at it, like, look at how beautiful and expensive my eyeshadow looks. And even though this is still at a high-end price, it's not at the luxury price that it's competing against. So I cannot recommend Odin's Eye's eyeshadows enough. And this palette in particular really spoke to me. I love neutral to warm toned shades. I believe that this palette has some of the most spectacular mattes. They are very richly pigmented. They blend like an absolute dream, and it has these really beautiful, very like reflective shimmers as well that make the palette so beautiful. Besides that, I really love that it's not just a neutral palette or just a warm tone palette, but it has these green accents in it. This one, by the way, is a beautiful duochrome, but the camera doesn't really show it like that. It has these beautiful duochromes and these beautiful glittery shimmers and these beautiful pops of color in it that make it extremely special. So at the moment being, my favorite collaboration palette ever has got to be the Judy palette with Oden's Eye Cosmetics. Absolutely love this one. And I also want to mention the Annette and Oden's Eye collaboration palette. It's called Giant Wolves. Chef's Kiss, that palette is also beautiful. And the Angelica Nyqvist and Kaleidos palette collaboration from last year also comes to mind. Absolutely love those. But I feel like this one here is more me. The next prompt is my favorite eyeshadow palette from 2021, and if you've been watching my channel for a while, I did a video talking about all of the palettes I tried last year. I ranked every single one from worst to best. I believe it was like 60 palettes total. And the one that came at number one is of course the one I'm going to talk about today, and that is this beautiful palette right here. This is from Mother Pat. This is the Pat McGrath Mothership number 9 palette. It's called Utopian Dream. And this right here is what it looks like on the inside. I've never seen shimmers sparkle as much as these shimmers sparkle down here. Look at that. Like if I were to like put that on my eye right there, so beautiful. These right here stole the show. Besides that, I am obsessed with Mothership palettes. Let's just get that out of the way. And this one is one of the most special ones in my opinion. It has 3 different mattes. This peachy one, this more neutral transition-y one, and this pretty dark brown burgundy color. It has a beautiful highlighter shade. It has these shimmers right here that, even though they're not like her special formula, are still really special shades. And then of course her Astro Blitz shades down here really make her palettes like truly special. Like if her palettes were just like these right here, that's like a 10. But when you see it like this, it's like a 15 out of 10 for me, you know? So as you can see, I'm very passionate about this palette. This was definitely my favorite palette from 2021. Okay, let's keep going, and the next prompt is a palette I did not expect to love. And I struggled with my answer here because even though it was pretty clear, this palette that I'm about to mention is also the answer for another question. Undoubtedly, this is the palette that for me fits both categories. The palette is the Natasha Denona Face and Eyes palette, and when I first saw this palette announced, I was like, but why? I felt like we had all of these colors from Natasha Denona already. This was not a necessary palette and I was just going to be bored with it. And when I tell you, I could not have possibly been more wrong. This palette is absolutely spectacular, and let me explain why. First of all, it is a beautiful multifunctional palette that has the most beautiful cream blush ever. I feel like my ideal most favorite blushes have colors like this one here. It's not too dark, not too light, not too cool, not too warm, rosy but not too pink. It's kind of like in the middle, just perfection in a blush if you ask me. Besides that, it comes with this beautiful highlighter right here that is just very fitting. It looks beautiful, it's glowy, it has a little bit of a shimmer in it, but it doesn't enhance my texture on my cheeks. And last but not least, it has absolutely stunning eyeshadows. I feel like on regular eyeshadow palettes from Natasha Denona lately, one of the things that I've been criticizing the most per se is that they don't give me what like the gold palette gave me. They don't have the really pretty shimmers. They have more toned down natural shimmers that are not as vava boom as I like my shimmers to be. And this Face and Eyes palette here, believe it or not, even though it only has 5 eyeshadows, it has 3 beautiful neutral to warmish type of mattes, but also the shimmers that come in this palette are actually really light reflecting, a little bit more attention seeking. And so I have enjoyed this palette so much since it came out. I took it on 2 trips already, and it just every time gives me the perfect look. So I am sorry for what I thought about you before you launched. You are actually perfect. Okay, so next we are going to talk about a palette that sparks joy. And I mean, I didn't even have to think about this twice. This right here is the Venus in Fleur Voyeuristic Vixen palette from Pat McGrath. This is what the inside looks like right here. And this palette, every time I open it, it just gives me so much joy. If you haven't seen it, you can go back to the video where I first reviewed this palette, and I was not expecting this palette to be as beautiful as it is, and I was a little hormonal and sentimental, and so when I opened this palette and I saw and I saw this shade right here, my eyes stared, and you guys made so much fun of me in that video. And so for that reason, this palette brings me joy, because it was not only like a funny story plus a palette that I truly really love. I love this shimmer shade so much. It is so pretty. It's like gold and rose and beautiful. The bronze shade, the highlight shade, this burgundy matte right here, actual perfection. Anyways, not only do I think of this palette very highly, reason for which it would bring me joy, but most importantly, it makes me think of the connection that you guys and I have, because you guys, you know, are like my little family. Those of you who only watch and those of you who actually take the time to comment and make fun of me and like joke around with me, I really appreciate you. And so every time I talk about this palette now, or every time I open this palette to use, it's, you know, the palette that made me cry, and my reaction got so many reactions out of you in that video. And so for like all of those reasons, I guess it is a palette that brings me so much joy. Okay, so the next prompt is the newest palette in my collection, and the newest palette in my collection is this one right here. This is the Huda Beauty Lunar New Year palette. It is a beautiful warm tone palette. I love the mustardy yellows. I love the burgundy colors. I did a 3 looks 1 palette with this one recently, and so this one right here is my last palette purchase. I really like it. I don't think it's like a new favorite palette of mine or anything, but I did really enjoy creating the video with this one, and it performs beautifully. So if you're looking for a palette with this sort of color story, I do recommend it. And so yeah, this is the newest palette in my collection. And so we've gotten to the last prompt, and it is the first palette used in 2022, and I did a little investigating. The first video I posted this year was an empties video, but that was actually filmed in December. So the first video I filmed this year was my PR makeup haul. Thankfully, in every single video I link every single product that I have on my face down in the description box. So I opened that video and I was able to see which palette I had used, and it is this one right here. That is why I told you that this palette was the answer for 2 different questions, because this was the first palette that I used in 2022. Like I said before, lovely palette, and these good old boring shades right here are definitely go-tos for me, so I can see why this palette has become one of my favorites easily, and why it was the first palette I reached for this year. I do also think that the reason I reached for this one was because I probably filmed that video around the 6th or 7th of January, because the first few days of January I wasn't feeling well because I had COVID, and I probably hadn't fully unpacked my bag yet. From when I came back from Miami, I had taken this palette to Miami with me, and so it was probably very close to me where I could just reach for it and not have to think about what to wear. And so I'm betting that's the reason why I used it for my first video of the year. Okay, and so that's it. We've gotten to the end of this video. I had an absolute blast coming up with the answers to these prompts and filming this video and talking about eyeshadow palettes, because like I said at the beginning, that is my favorite thing to do. I really hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't watched Ali's video and Samantha's video, like I said, I have them linked down below and I highly recommend that you go watch them. Oh, if you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. I love you guys so much. Thank you for being here, and I hope to see you back in the next video. Bye!